Welcome to the Startup Show. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show we have Vitaly Golomb. He's the founder of Sofie Labs. Welcome, Vitaly. This is we haven't talked in a long time.
Thanks, Sean. Good to see you.
So this is a new startup that you guys are working on. Tell me about this thing.
This is a new startup. So back in my corporate venture days at HP, now 8 years ago or so, during the heydays of chatbots, it got me started thinking about how is this going to change, really kind of this future of work theme. And here we are, a little bit later, second wave, and I teamed up with a very good friend of mine, Jonathan Romley, who was also experienced. I had a couple of interesting exits in AI labs, let's say, in the last few years in computer vision. And we decided to form a labs, hence the name, in exploring commercial applications of autonomous agents. And what we have put together and have been testing for a few months now, and now starting to talk about more publicly, is something that looks like the future of the CRM.
Okay.
And it actually replaces a lot of the human function and puts automation into the grunt work of sales.
So I want to put together, I don't know, a list of leads. This thing will do it for me, and then it'll reach out for me, all that other good stuff. Or what's the
So
primary
actually quite the
strategy?
opposite. So there are a lot of companies that jumped on this kind of, we call it, AI spam. And you're getting a lot of these, hope these email finds you wells in your inbox these days. And that's largely that. But the reality is, if you've ever built a sales operation, doing kind of cold outreach, your chances of catching the right person at the right time are very, very low.
Mm-hmm.
So it's much better to create a magnet and have them come to you. And that's what a proper marketing function does in a mature sales operation. So we are kind of, if you look at, there's a marketing operation on top that brings in the leads. There are the junior salespeople, the inbound SDRs that qualify those leads. And there's the account executives that pitch the product and try to close the customer. So that middle layer of the sandwich, the cheese or the ham in that sandwich, the inbound SDRs, is what we're effectively automating, where it could be, potentially we could replace them altogether. But in a lot of times what we're hearing from our pilot participants is that they're trying to scale operations. And this is actually the most painful place for them, because to recruit, hire, train, and retain these junior salespeople, which are oftentimes or almost always, straight out of college, first job into sales, they're not very good.
Mm-hmm.
That's very difficult. And that's kind of the biggest churn when you're trying to scale a sales operation, is bringing in this kind of fresh talent that then, 2/3 of them burn out and they just don't perform and they go on to do something else. And a third of them, they stick around for maybe 6 or 12 months, and then they become account executives, and you start the whole thing over and over again.
Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting question. How do you? So let's say you say that the SDRs or whoever, these junior salespeople come in. It's hard to train them, hard to get them up to speed. But how do you get a experienced salesperson if you don't have a completely awful junior one?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you have sales training programs that will change, because this grunt work, just like, in investment banking that I spent the last 6 or 7 years of my life, you have analysts coming in and working 100, 120 hours a week. You can say that's a training program, but really it's kind of the manure shoveling of the industry. And it's a lot of grunt work that can be avoided. It's not really necessary. There are different, better ways to train people. And if they really want to build a career in sales, they'll just have kind of a longer gestational period, let's say. And their entry point might not be, jumping in after 2 weeks of training, but going through a training program for several months and coming in kind of slightly different level.
Interesting. Yeah, that's always been the question. I mean, it's the idea of I don't know, the autonomous truck driver. Like, what does an autonomous truck driver do at some point? Like, do they just sit there and read a book while the thing drives around, or is there nobody in the car at all?
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic example. And I've been talking about that for years now, because I've been involved in mobility, and that's one of the key areas. Like, truck drivers are the number one profession by volume. I think it's like 9 million truck drivers in the US, but there's always a shortage, and they don't stick around, right? They average tenure is like 10 months at a company, and they get recruited to another one, and it's exceedingly expensive. It's a big cost center. So, theoretically, people talk about, oh, what's going to happen when we have autonomous driving, but in reality, it's going to take a generation to really replace that profession. And in the meantime, it's an area where we're having a big labor shortage. And same thing in, kind of professional sales, let's say software sales or what have you, that we're dealing with. It's the same issues, that finding that talent is one of the key pain points.
Okay. Why did you guys do another startup? I mean, you've done VC, you've done a bunch of stuff. They're older than most of the startup folks that we used to talk
Hey
to.
now.
Yeah, not I'm
Well,
not saying anything, but
yeah, I'm still a year or two younger than the average age of a public company CEO.
yeah,
So we've got a little running room, but yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's I like to say for the last like 9 years since I exited my last company, my last startup in 2015, I've been kind of having a vacation on the dark side of the table,
hmm
first in corporate venture and then investment banking. But it's the right time, and that's the most important thing, right? That we learn with startups is timing is the most important thing. Being too early is actually worse than being too late,
yep,
in a sense. And getting the timing right is key. And it's hard to ignore that this is really kind of the next big wave in and where we get an opportunity to use new generation of technology to solve the same old problems, but do it 10 times faster, better, cheaper. So you're going to have a lot of new entrants that come in and take over and kind of, this keyword disruption is disrupting markets. The old ways of doing things, the old CRMs, you name it, are going to go away because, the way we see it is like CRM is a pain in the ass, but it's a necessary one for every company. But the way it's designed is really for processing a lot of raw data by
hmm
humans. And when we're talking about automation that's coming in and it can do kind of this logic much, much faster and much better, that whole concept is going to change, right? It's going to be kind of a black box with magic. And you tell that black box, here are my marketing channels, here's my product, here's how my sales process should work, and here's what a qualified prospect looks for me. And out the other end, you have appointments that are set up for your salespeople. It's still, there's still a human element in sales always, especially with kind of larger products that you don't just add to a shopping cart. But automating and making their life easier is really important. And
hmm
then, and yet, another aspect is that when automation, comes onto the scene, and it's doing so now, it becomes an arms race. And if your competitors are using this automation, it's a huge leverage point. If you don't use it, you just won't be able to compete. So it's really interesting. It's not just one company is going to get an advantage, but it's going to be this whole shift to a very different sales process. In our case, other automation in other types of businesses along the way as well.
What do you know now that you didn't know before for your previous startups?
Oh man, I've been on the other side of the sausage factory, right? So I
hmm
understand how all decisions are made. We made all the mistakes. I probably the biggest one, if you want to put me on the spot, is with my last startup. We were really trying hard to educate our customer, meaning, okay, here's a vitamin, here's what's good for you.
hmm
My last startup was selling e-commerce software, one of the first in the printing industry, where our average customer was a 57-year-old white guy with a high school education that didn't realize that he's running a manufacturing business with yield as a key term. And all they wanted was more sales, more top of the funnel. And it took us a while to figure out, like, look, let's stop swimming against the stream here and just give them what they want.
hmm
So this time around, I would say I've learned that lesson. My co-founder Jonathan's learned that lesson several times over as well. And we are going with the flow, trying to get the timing right and talking to the audience and giving them what they need and presenting it in a way that they can better understand, that it aligns with their goals more than
Okay,
anything.
interesting. Is it easier or harder to raise right now? What's the situation?
It's well, cost of capital is very high, right?
hmm
So if you look at kind of down the chain, in 2013, new fund managers, new VCs raised $13 billion. In 2023, they raised $1 billion.
hmm
So you can see kind of there's a choke point in venture, and there's a flight to quality in a sense that for large venture funds, it's easy to raise obscene amounts of capital. It's much more difficult for newer investors who usually do the first rounds, take the risk, etc. So I'd say on balance, kind of the conditions are harder. But when you break through and you're on theme, and the theme right now is generative AI, obviously for everything, then when you prove yourself a little bit, it's easier. It's been much easier in past years, where companies were raising a lot of money pretty consistently on an idea. Now you have this kind of reaction where investors want to see proof points, and it was a seller's market for over 10 years, for 12
hmm
years, and now there's kind of this opposite reaction where VCs can afford to wait, and they know the deals are not going to go away. So from that perspective, it's harder. From another perspective, it's interesting is that we thought that our experience, our network, is going to make things a little bit easier, but in reality, what's happened instead is that the standards and the expectations from experienced founders are a lot higher. So we funded this company ourselves up to this point, more or less, and we are getting those proof points to where next steps will be to go out to the market and kind of scale up from there.
Is that what you would recommend for startups right now, that they should fund stuff themselves?
It depends on your situation.
Mm-hmm.
If you're fresh out of college and this is your rent money and food money, no, don't do that. Because one of the most important things, early on, when you don't have context, when you don't have the experience and the objectivity, raising money from others is a proof point. It's a validation that you have a vision, right? If you can convince one other person, it's a vision. If you can't, it's a hallucination. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to understand that either you're hallucinating and you can't convince anybody that this is a worthy idea. Certainly, if you can't convince investors, you're not going to be able to convince customers. You should, listen to hive minds that tells you something, the environment tells you something, and not go broke on your idea.
Okay.
That's probably 90% of the time. If you're experienced and you want to get further along and you know what you're doing and you kind of understand the signals and you can risk that capital without affecting your family, then yeah, get a little bit further down the road, get to first customers, first revenue, and then go out to market.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Would you do another startup after this one, if it like, either way, if it succeeds or fails?
You know, uh, as a cancer survivor, I
Mm-hmm.
can tell you that I had a bit of a scare around my 40th birthday, and it kind of wakes you up to workaholism and
Mm-hmm.
what's really important to you, because and then all of a sudden when that word gets thrown at you, you start thinking very differently. Like, time's up, potentially. So you start thinking about all the things you want to do. Work for a lot of people gives them the validation, and a lot of people in the startup world, especially, have kind of an unhealthy relationship with work,
Mm-hmm.
where their personal identity gets wrapped up with their startup's identity, and that's all they do. That's all they're known for. That's all they think about. And oftentimes, most startups fail. So for those people, it's a big personal failure, and they don't know what to do with themselves. They have a kind of crisis of personality. um, it's really important to understand that work is work and you have these ideas, and to think about this more as like a scientist, where you're going to run experiments, and a startup is an experiment. And if it works out, great. If it doesn't, you do something else and you don't let it personally affect you. And another thing, as you get older, you create, you're supposed to create multiple streams of revenue, so you can not have to rely on any one thing
Mm-hmm.
to support your family and your lifestyle, etc. So then you can actually play and be a little bit more risky with the startups. So kind of long answer, very likely that I'll, keep doing different things, different projects, exploring, I'm on a couple of boards, and I get a lot of different satisfaction from that. But we kind of told ourselves, as guys in our 40s with kids, we're going to really push on this one, and we think we have the timing right, and we have the right idea, and the execution so far, and the results are telling us that we're on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I don't know, if this one for some reason doesn't work out, you can ask me again.
Yeah. I
For
mean,
now,
there's like
kind of,
Walmart greeter. You could be a Walmart greeter. That's good for us
I
old
could be.
guys. Yeah, that's
I
good
have a
for us.
dream of operating a taco truck on the beach in
Oh yeah,
Mexico.
see that would be amazing. Right? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. I want to
yeah.
like make I want to make meatloaf in Potsdam, New York. I think that would be
Yeah, I
actually very,
can't
very
cook to save
pleasant.
my life, but this
Yeah,
idea of
it's,
running a taco
it's
truck on a surf beach in Mexico
yeah,
sounds
it's
good.
tacos. Well, Vitaly, thank you for joining us. This has been cool. It's nice to see a startup that's just starting out. What's the website?
Sofielabs.com,
Mm-hmm.
SOFIELABS.com, and you can sign up for a pilot. We're looking for companies that want to try it out. Obviously, pilot's free, and they already have sales operations and a sales playbook. That's really important for us to be able to train our systems that will then work on your behalf 24 hours a day in 35 languages and engage with your customers.
All right, perfect. This has been the Startup Show. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next episode.